morning, church. It's good to be with you. Happy Father's Day. I felt like in the tone of Father's Day, we probably should start with a dad joke. What do you call someone who isn't a dad but tells dad jokes? A faux pas. Yeah, see, I think one of the reasons that dad jokes exist is because, it's a way to relieve some of the pressure of all of the things of life that are thrown at all of us, but especially dads. And so I just wonder, when we're growing up and when we see boys and girls and we see all of the things that they're accomplishing, how much we honor the fact that they've grown up and become bigger and better at something else, right? And that pressure then just continues to build where, you then have this expectation of men becoming fathers or mentors or bosses. And then I wonder in life, if we're always just thinking about the next step, if we live in this constant pressure of the human condition, and then we just need something to lighten the mood. We need something that's mindless or meaningless or skibbity if you were a high schooler, something that just isn't all of that important. Because I think when I've watched this, we see our kids and we say, hey kids, we want you to listen up, take this seriously, shh, be quiet, we're in church, you're supposed to sit this way, you're supposed to do this. Maybe you feel that pressure. Moms, maybe it's to be the best soccer mom or the mom who has it most put together and has, it looks like you have the best balance between your work life and your mom life. Or maybe it's just the show that you put on. Dads, maybe it's hey, don't be lazy, be invested in your kids. At work, maybe it's how are you increasing your productivity? I remember talking to my dad one time, and he was 71, and he went in for a performance review evaluation, and they sat down with his 40-year-old boss and was like, what are your career goals? Yeah. There comes a point where the next step is not as important as the ones that we've been building and growing, and that finding a way to be better or live into that corporate pressure is just overwhelming. And some people have told me in my life that I'm pretty comfortable being on stage and speaking in front of others, and that they're not comfortable in these kind of environments and not comfortable doing this thing. They could never stand up in front of a group of people. And I've always found myself to be a person who is fine with being on stage and talking and being in the limelight, but there was a time where I thought I had it all figured out, and I totally bombed. Back in my community college days, I was in a history class, and I had to do a family history presentation. I wrote a big paper about my family history, and not to toot my own horn, but it was pretty incredible. I found documents all the way back to my family immigrating to Canada as indentured servants. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Look at all the cool stuff I found. And I was like, I know all this stuff about my family. And so I wrote my paper, and then I get up to do my presentation, and I prepared not at all for the presentation. I was like, I know it all. I'm going to be able to do this. I have the charisma to carry this, right? And I got so flustered in that space, my nerves increased. And I remember standing in front of my classroom of 20 people and going, what do I say next? Oh yeah, over here. Oh yeah, over there. And my nerves, and then I started looking at the clock and going, how much longer do I have to do this? How much longer do I have to do this? How much, what else am I gonna say? How much more am I gonna do? And I think that sometimes that pressure gets to us. I actually didn't do very good in some of my preaching classes as I was in seminary and in college, because I remember being in this space where I felt like I had to preach the sermon that the professor wanted me to preach and not the one that matched who I was and what my voice was. And I never really had somebody for a while actually teach me and coach me for how to do it. And one of the pieces of feedback I got, like today, was, oh, you didn't start your sermon with the Bible, so I wasn't sure if you were going to talk about Jesus. And eventually you got there, but I wasn't so sure at the beginning, right? And I remember going like, well, then why are you giving me that feedback if you know that I got there and you know that I went to the Bible and you know whatever else? And I remember living in this pressure of expectation of others, of the expectation and the isolation of being up front and being in this position of having voice or being empowered to lead. And I think sometimes we can get into the mindset of people pleasing and fall into the temptation to retreat instead of doing what God actually has for us. And that's where we're going today. We're in this journey of the Exodus. The Exodus just means the exit. It's the story of God's people's exit from Egypt, right? And we're focusing on the character of Moses, the actual person. He's not just a character. He's not made up. The actual person of Moses. And there's some incredible things about the story of Moses before we actually get into the history. Last week, I went whitewater rafting down the American River. And we were rafting down, and there were some ducks kind of up on the river. And the guide said, you see those ducks? See, up at the top of the river, you might actually see a mama duck with like 2, 3, or 4 ducklings. And then when you get down to the end of the river, you're going to see a mama duck with like 13, 14, 15 ducklings, because they do this thing called adoption by the river, right? So the mama ducks downriver will adopt the little baby ducks that accidentally float down the river and go through the rapids. And that's the story of Moses. That's the identity that Moses gets. He starts as a little baby, gets put in the river, and he floats downriver, and he's adopted by the princess, right? So we get royal Moses, but he, in that journey, ends up in this crisis of identity of who am I? How do I fit? How do I fit in the world? How do I fit as a Jewish boy in the Egyptian world here in Egypt? And he goes from this place of royalty to then feeling the indignation of watching his people, one of the slaves, be beaten. And he ends up leading that into killing him. And then he thinks he gets away with it, and he finds out he hasn't, and he flees in fear for what is going to happen to him. And he ends up running away and becoming a shepherd in Midian. And then we jump way forward in the story. He has this incredible experience with a bush that's on fire that doesn't get consumed. And we see Moses start to be challenged to live into the calling that God has. And yet he's still not sure. So he asks for help, and Aaron goes and speaks with him. And then he has the power of the staff that we're going to get to in a couple of weeks. And all the power that God gives him in the signs and the miracles and the wonders. And eventually he leads the people out of Egypt. They cross the Red Sea. And just like Pastor Joy shared with us last week, he gets to lead a bunch of complaining and unhappy people who have never learned how to do anything other than be slaves, and they have to go on this journey of getting the slavery out of them. But while they're going on this journey, Moses is also going through a new journey, and it's a journey of leadership. Because while he grew up a royal and probably had opportunities to lead as a young person, he's now spent a really long time in the wilderness as a shepherd. And it actually says when he goes to Pharaoh, he's in his 80s, and he's really leading for the first time. And so we're going to pick up this story here in Exodus chapter 18, where Moses has this experience of leadership, and he has this invitation of how to be a better leader. So if you want to open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 18, we're going to read the story of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, and the fatherly advice and the way that he connects with Moses. And we're going to spend a little bit of time in this entire chapter. We're going to go all the way through it. So let the story flow over you this morning. May the words and the experiences resonate in you. And we'll take a few stops along the way. But this is Exodus chapter 18, verse 1. Jethro, Midian's priest and Moses' father-in-law, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and for God's people Israel, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And Moses' father-in-law Jethro took with him Zipporah, Moses' wife, whom he had sent away, along with her 2 sons, one named Gershom, or sojourner, or wanderer, because he had said, I have been an immigrant living in a foreign land. And the other was named Eliezer, God's help, because he said, the God of my ancestors was my helper, who rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. I love this. This is kind of a little freebie for the day. I love in the Old Testament especially how names and the names of people identify something that God is doing in them. I love it. Like the story of Naomi is so good. Like she says her name means joyful, but she's like, no, but now call me like basically sad. And nobody does, because God has a joyful thing for her that they want to declare over her. And I love this because as a parent, as a dad, I loved getting to name my kids and be thoughtful about the name that I shared with my kids. And so my son, Joshua, his name means the Lord saves. And I don't know why God put that on our hearts to name him Joshua, but we believe that God is going to do something amazing in what he's called him to. And then my daughter, her name's Eliana. You'd be like, oh, that's super unique. Like, where'd you find that? I found it in the Bible, reading the Bible, and it means my God answers. I'm like, I don't know what God's going to answer. I don't know what he's going to do, but like, I just love names that have meaning, and that Moses has named his kids meaningfully to represent something for the people of God. And it's just such a beautiful thing for me. That's my freebie for the day. Enjoy it and think about how you name your kids or your grandkids. You can name them whatever you want. That's fine. My favorite name was the story of Lamangelo and Orangelo that we got to hear when Jessica was coming up with the name for her son Judah, and it was just their mom's favorite Jello. She had twins and called them Orange Jello and Lemon Jello. It was really great. Names have meaning. Jethro. Back to Jethro. Verse 5. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and wife back to him in the desert, where he had set up camp at God's mountain. He sent word to Moses, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you, along with your wife and her 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other how they were doing, and then they went into the tent. I've never bowed down and kissed my father-in-law, so maybe there's something for me to learn here about Moses' posture. Moses then told his father-in-law everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians on Israel's behalf, all the difficulty they had on their journey, and how the Lord had rescued them. Jethro was glad about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in saving them from the Egyptians' power. And Jethro said, bless the Lord who rescued you from the Egyptians' power and from Pharaoh's power, who rescued the people from Egypt's oppressive power. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods because of what happened when the Egyptians plotted against them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought an entirely burned offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all of Israel's elders to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. The next day, Moses sat as judge for the people while the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all he was doing for the people, he said, "What is it that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people are standing around you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when a conflict arises between them, they come to me and I judge between the two of them. I also teach them God's regulations and instructions." And Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing isn't good. You will end up totally wearing yourself out, both you and these people who are with you. The work is too difficult for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me and let me give you some advice. And may God be with you. Your role should be to represent the people of God. You should bring their disputes before God yourself, explain the regulations and instructions to them, let them know the way they're supposed to go and the things they're supposed to do, but you should also look among all the people for capable persons who respect God. They should be trustworthy and not corrupt. Set these persons over the people as officers of groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. They should bring every major dispute to you, but they should decide all of the minor cases themselves. This will be much easier for you, and they will share your load. If you do this and God directs you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will be able to go back to their homes much happier." And Moses listened to his father-in-law's suggestions and did everything that he had said. And Moses chose capable persons from all of Israel and set them as leaders over the people, as officers over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they acted as judges for the people at all times. They would refer hard cases to Moses, but all the minor cases they decided themselves. And then Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, and Jethro went back to his own country. See, I think Moses has fallen into the trap of the pressure of expectation to be the leader all by himself. And he chose isolation. The same way that he chose isolation in the midst of his fear and running away from Egypt, he continues to choose isolation. And instead, Jethro challenges him to lead a different existence, to lead an existence of community, of reliance on others. See, Moses has done the rugged individualism thing that we expect of so many men, that we highlight and praise. Where you're like, oh yeah, he likes to camp in the woods by himself. Go Bear Grylls. Yeah, jump off that giant rock. Oh, that's so cool, right? There's a guy named Scott Galloway, and he talks about the devastation of isolation in the lives of men, especially. We know that everybody is dealing with, at different times in your life, you're going to deal with different versions of mental health things and struggles or addictions that come in your life. But it's kind of unique that the outcomes for men are significantly worse because of the isolation that they experience, because of the friendships that they don't have. This is why when Pastor Kyle says we all need 5 friends and a job, it's all about us finding belonging together and not being isolated in the church, not being separated from what God has for us, not being living constantly under the pressure of needing to be better or be more, but to be living with the pressure and the encouragement to share the burden with those around you. And I just think that so often we will lead, most of us will lead in our lives ourselves down a path of being like, I don't want to be a burden to that person. I don't want them to see that I'm crying. I don't want them to see that I'm broken and I'm human. And the reality is, we weren't built to be alone. And so instead of being independent in this moment, instead of just being the sole shepherd caring for some sheep, Moses is being taught the lesson of becoming interdependent on those around him. And so I have two challenges for you today. Two kind of big things that I see in this passage that I want to share with you, that I want you to take home and consider. Maybe you fall into both camps, maybe you fall into one camp, and then that you can then say, yes, I need to do that. I need to be that kind of a person. I need to live in that kind of a community that is going to invite me into this thing. And so the first challenge is the advice that you need to get. I think actually all of us in our lives, if we look at the story of Moses, he kind of thinks he has it figured out, but actually there's some things that we probably need to receive, that we need to get, that we need to be open to hearing about our lives. And I think it's pretty incredible the way that he does this. But first, I think part of it is about our heart for being willing to listen. See, my very first job in ministry, I had a boss who never came and saw me teach or do anything. And like I said, I didn't have the best coaching and learning. I probably could have had more coaching and learning, and I needed it. And he came to me and he's like, you need to work on your preaching. And I was like, how would you know? You don't ever come and see me. And so then he started to give me like things that I had to do as like job requirements to get better at preaching. And I remember going like, I still don't get this. I still don't understand this. And it came to the point where I'm like, I just don't even know if I can ever live up to this thing. Because the relational community and the advice he was giving didn't actually seem applicable to me. Versus a few years later, I had a friend who had a master's in education, and he's like, hey, I want to encourage you to learn how to teach, but here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to share this book with you. We're going to sit down and talk about it. You're going to write your talk, and you're going to preach it to me. And then you're going to preach it to our students, and each step of the way, I'm going to give you encouragement and feedback and help you say, that sounded really good from your mouth. And I started to realize, I'm like, man, I have so much to work on. I have so much more area to grow and to learn and to discover. And it was the same advice, but it came from a completely different heart of me being willing and ready to listen to what he had to say. Fast forward to now where we actually every single week sit down with Kyle or me or Joy, and we preach our sermons on Wednesdays to our staff, to different members of our staff, and again, get feedback and advice and encouragement and direction and saying, is that who we are as a church? Is that the thing? There's even a big thing about this sermon that I changed today because of the advice and the feedback I got from people. And it's actually incredible because when we enter into this space of willingness to listen, God does incredible things. And I think that's exactly what Moses does in this story. It starts with Moses coming and hearing that his father-in-law is coming, and he enters the room. He enters that space with Jethro with so much respect that he bows down and he kisses Jethro, right? He's just so excited by what God is doing in that relationship. And in that same heart, he becomes a person who is able to listen to Jethro, to celebrate what God has done, and then to adjust the way he lives. So it starts with respect and honor. And then it starts with celebrating what God is doing in his life. And then humility of listening and the willingness to adjust. What advice do you need to get that you haven't heard from somebody? Why haven't you heard it? Why haven't you been ready to experience it? See, Moses, he gives honor to Jethro, and then he celebrates the amazing things God has done. And then, even though God is already doing amazing things, he listens and he adjusts to what God has and what Jethro has for him. But there's this other challenge that I have for you this morning, and the other challenge is the challenge of the advice that you need to give. The advice that you need to give. Now, I don't know. I wonder sometimes, I think we all can have and maybe fall into this thing of like knowing we have some good advice to give. Like, I have some great experience. I have some advice to give. I have something that I noticed that I need to say to this person. I have a way. There's entire threads on Reddit about like, did I give this advice the right way, or did I say this thing the right way, or am I the bad person here? They say it a different way, but like, right? Am I the bad person for having done it this way, of holding my boundaries or doing this thing? And I wonder sometimes if the way that we give advice could be modeled a little bit differently. See, Jethro does this incredible thing. He comes in, he's greeted by Moses, and then we see him do what? He sits and he listens to Moses share the stories. Now, I think it's really funny when I read this because Moses is an old man at this point, and his father-in-law is probably an even older man. And I don't know if you've ever sat down with somebody in their 80s and they tell you a story you already know. But it actually says, right? It says, Jethro heard about everything God had done for Moses and God's people and how the Lord brought him. And Moses' father-in-law took him, his wife, who he'd sent away along with her sons, and he goes out to meet Moses. So he has already heard the story that Moses is wanting to share. He's already heard about the good things that God has done. He's already heard all of it, and yet he still walks into that space and he sits down and he allows Moses to share the incredible things and to celebrate what God is doing. He listens to Moses. And then he celebrates and he changes his own perspective and he goes, I know I'm a priest of Midian, but I see that your God is the greatest God, and I bring an offering to his priests, to Aaron. And I now submit and change my life based on the amazing things that you have shared with me. And then Jethro sits and he watches and he observes. And he sees Moses alone. And he sees Moses struggling. And he goes to him and he confronts him. And he doesn't confront him in the like, you're the worst, tear him down, make him feel like he's less than. He confronts him, and he confronts him in a way that invites him to correct his incorrect perception of the world. Not to crush him, not to tell him that he's not a good leader, but to say, hey, you've lived a life of isolation, and now it is time for you to live a life of interdependence. And I just want to shift your focus because God is doing amazing things, but there's always more for us to learn to be healthier and better. And so he confronts Moses and he provides clear advice for him, and he advises him, and he encourages him, and he directs him. See, I think Moses might not have been ready to hear that. And in fact, if you see all of the advice God gives him along the way earlier in his journey, he's not ready to hear any of it, right? Like, he goes to the burning bush, and God's like, go do this thing, and he's literally watching a bush on fire, and Moses is like, yeah, but I don't talk good. Right? Like, he's full of all of the excuses. Moses could be like, bro, I'm 80. This is just how I do life. Get over it. But instead, because of the relationship, because of Moses' posture, he not only gets the advice, he has the opportunity to give the advice. And Jethro, on the same way, he does so much work in the life of Moses that Moses honors him, loves him, and respects him, and he has earned the right to give Moses advice. And that doesn't mean that in your life you can't just say the thing that needs to be said sometimes. It just means that sometimes, actually, if you think about it, the people who had the most impact on you and had the most change that happened in you when they gave you that advice were the people who had the deepest relationships with you, who had listened with you and shared the journey with you and been in the burdens and in the fires with you. They're the people that you trusted and respected. And so when they said, maybe you could do it this way, you were willing to hear it. And I think that's the difference between the two people who walked this journey with me and learning how to speak, where I'm still learning and growing. And yet, one person I could not hear the same words from as the other. And my posture had to change for how I respected and carried others. But even more than that, I think when we look at this model of leadership, we go, what does that mean for our church? So as you come and you get connected at our church, my hope is that you'll see that we model what we do off of this. We don't want to do church as your pastors and as your leaders all by ourselves. We don't want to stand up here and toot our own horn about how great we are. Instead, we want to create space to empower you. And that's what our small groups are all about. It's giving us the opportunity to invest in some who invest in some who invest in some. And so maybe you've been one of those who's been in a group for a long time and you're like, man, we all invest in each other. I'm just going to challenge you. Other people need to hear that thing. And I don't know how Joy would do this, but I would be like, man, you could lead a group and be in your own group. It'd be so incredible. Think about all of the people you could have an impact on. That's a youth pastor in me who's like, hey, I always need more people to invest in more people. This is going to be incredible. You can double your investment, right? But actually, that's not the goal. The goal is for us to empower you to lead, for them to lead, to see the thousands and the hundreds and the 50s and the 10s have the opportunity to grow in their leadership, to support the work that God is doing so that we can all be in this together, because this is the advice. Listen to me as I give you some advice, and may God be with you. Your role should be to represent the people before God. You should bring their disputes before God yourself. But you cannot do this alone. You should look among them for capable persons who respect God, and they should be trustworthy and not corrupt. See, I believe God can do amazing things if we're willing to open ourselves up to the environments and relationships with others. But even more, that we can be people who are not afraid to build the kind of relationships where we no longer have to carry the burden alone. And then we have to choose. We have to choose in the midst of our struggles to let other people in and to walk the journey with us. We have to choose to allow the advice to come in. We have to choose to build the relationships, to earn the trust, to speak life into others. See, God is this incredible Father that we have. And he looks down on us and he does amazing things with us and in spite of us. But actually, he invites us to recognize the beauty of community and friendship and reliance on one another. And so today, I hope that you can hear in the midst of your community that there may be some advice that you need to get, but there's also some advice that you need to give, that you will know that God is with you in this journey. Let's pray. God, we thank you for all of the ways that you have led us and shaped us and moved in us. God, would you allow our hearts to be open to how you lead and how you move? God, would you show us those things that we can learn and grow in? Would you lead us to a group of people and to take the step of trusting others to speak into our lives and into our hopes, into our dreams? God, would you allow us to be the kind of people who build trust with others and speak hope into them? God, maybe today the message of Moses and the advice that he needs to get settles in on us. And maybe, Lord, it's the message of Jethro, of how to give some amazing things. But God, I ask that you would stir deeply and richly in us, that you would lead us to be people of community and trust in you, who will know you, who will seek you together, who will carry each other's burdens, and who will allow others to carry our burdens too. God, we thank you and we praise your name.